Hello. What, too bright?
Where are you?
This is the way I live, Mary. I live on the stage. And Mary, thank you for allowing me to interview you.
Allowing you?
Well,
wow,
I mean,
that's a bit
you
of a
know, I
stretch.
know you had a choice. And I should let everyone know, Mary, I know Mary from before you all knew Mary because...
Not everybody, but most of the people here.
Right, and because I have a... I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I have a place in Provincetown. I bought it in 1994, so don't act like I'm like loaded or anything. And Mary lived in the it was like a, what would you call it?
Like a townhouse.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean
the Willows? It's a property.
We're very articulate.
Yeah.
So this is going to get better.
Yeah, it will. Anyway, Mary lived in the next
thing
over, and I remember you were in the yard and you were with Avery, your beautiful daughter, and I was with one of my sons, and I said, "Hi, I'm Judy."
Which seemed like a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah,
at the time.
right. And you said, "I'm Mary Trump," and
I did.
You said the name Trump. I probably said I'm Judy Gold because Elisa tells me that when I called her the first time, I was like, "Hi, it's Judy Gold," and she still makes fun of me about it. But and you said, "I'm Mary Trump," and I said, "Any Trump?" You know, I had a question, and you said yes, and I said, I hate him so much. This was 2002.
And that's our friendship.
Not as much as I do. Okay. Mary, this book.
How things have changed.
Yeah. This book is not political. It is a memoir. It is so. Your writing is so incredible, and it's so beautifully written to the point where, you know, the feelings that it brought up for me, I think for anyone who has a feeling in their body, which is unfortunately not your uncle, I think this book is so validating in a way. And I want to start, I mean, there's so much. It really is about trauma. And as I said to you, reading it, I brought up feelings of 2016 to 2020 for me because I, as a citizen, never felt the rage and you know, vitriol for someone. I had never felt like that. It was so foreign to me.
Yeah.
And this explains it all in a way. This is sort of like, I think the United States, many of us were in a series of traumatic instances with that fucking.
Yeah. I, you know, have been trying to figure out the best way to answer the question, why did you write this book? Saying because I owed my publisher a book is not compelling. So, and that's really not why. That's really not why. This is the book that I actually wanted to write the first time around, or much of it was.
Right.
But for obvious reasons, that really wasn't what we needed. We needed the book, my first book, which I now think of as a psychological history of a family.
Yes.
This one is, as you say, much more personal.
Much more specific.
Yeah, it's much more specific about my experiences in the context of my family of origin. My extended family plays less of a role. But it was also spurred on mostly by my realization sometime in 2023 that I had hit a wall, and that despite the enormous fortune I'd had since 2020, you know, not just with the publication of the first book, but the response to it, and the opportunities I'd had to pivot, to comment on broader issues, and the people I got to meet, the people I got to reconnect with, like you. Unlike everybody else on the planet, it felt like I wasn't moving on. You know, nobody was isolating from COVID in 2023 anymore. Right. And I was missing all sorts of opportunities to travel, to meet people who'd become friends of mine, but whom I'd never met in person before, to pursue other opportunities. And as I write in the beginning of the book, it felt like I was killing myself with isolation, with the intense self-loathing that can come with having complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I realized that if I wanted to change things, if I wanted to stop missing another season,
right.
I had to figure out how to connect what had happened to me growing up in my family and what was going on now. Otherwise, I was going to keep sliding further and further away from where I wanted to be.
Well, I would love to start with that, that family. I mean, you know, this book is like you're following this little girl who you're really invested in. One major character is the house. You talk about the house. I don't know what the house looked like, but I can only envision it from your descriptions of the rooms. And can you just explain what the house was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, which is very different from Jamaica Estates, which was the next town over, which is where my grandparents lived, in a house that we referred to as the house, capital letters, the house. That's where my dad grew up. It's actually funny. Anybody who knows anything about New York geography, and this just happened to me yesterday, when I say, oh, I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, they say to me, oh, you mean Jamaica Estates? Like, no, I'm pretty sure I know where I grew up. So I think the reason people leap to that conclusion is because Jamaica was and is more working class, lower middle class. When I was a kid, it was about 70% black, 30% white. And, you know, it was like a real neighborhood. It was this sort of great combination between city and suburb, took the subway everywhere. And I felt so comfortable there. And it was one of the two best things that ever happened to me. It was growing up in Jamaica. It really grounded me. But we spent a lot of time at the house. And it was a completely different universe. It is huge. It was cold. It was uninviting. And not that I knew any of that when I was a kid, of course. Like somebody asked me the other day, wasn't it weird growing up in that family? Like, it was totally normal growing up in that family.
Right. You get that
Yeah.
This is just normal for you.
Families are closed systems.
I love that the library had no books in it. That was one of my favorites.
The room we spent the most time in was the library. And there were lots of pictures on the bookshelves. There was not a book in that room other than Norman Vincent Peale's Power of Positive Thinking.
That's hilarious.
Until The Art of the Deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Another classic. Yeah.
No, it's actually funny you say that. Next to the Bible, it's my favorite book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think it's sold more copies.
Wow. Yeah. I love the Upside Down Bible book, which is nothing. Okay.
I parodied that to promote your book.
I know. Thank you. Okay. So you're a little girl. You're spending a lot of time at the house, which shows you this is how rich people live, kind of. But your father and your mother. Your father, the eldest son, probably the most intelligent, most talented, very handsome. He went to Lehigh University. He was in a Jewish frat. Mm-hmm. He was the only non-Jew.
Sigma Alpha Mu.
Yep. And he loved boating, flying planes. He went down to Florida. He met a beautiful woman.
Bahamas, yeah.
Bahamas. All right, I was close. And they had a great time together, and then they met up later, and they got married. And your mother, Linda, was a stewardess. I'm saying stewardess because that's what they called them. Okay, flight attendant, and he was.
That's a lawsuit coming.
Yeah, I know.
You know.
And he was a pilot, and your grandfather had such disdain for, you called him a glorified bus driver in the sky?
A glorified bus driver or a chauffeur in the sky.
Oh, okay.
Depending on his mood.
Right.
You know.
He was a disappointment and constantly reminded of that. And your mother gave birth to Fritz, your older brother, and he was a mistake, or he was not planned, is the way, no?
No, well.
It seemed like.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, yes. They did want to wait a couple of years.
Yeah.
So I think they got pregnant very shortly after the honeymoon.
Okay.
So yes, in that respect, yes. But they didn't get married because she was pregnant. They got they got pregnant sooner than they had planned.
Right.
Yeah.
And your parents did not like Linda.
My grandparents, no.
Yeah, I'm sorry, your grandparents.
Yeah.
I kind of think of them as your parents, the amount of time you spent there.
Yeah.
And the influence they had on everyone. Did not like Linda. I love that you say this in the book. Your grandmother, Mary Trump.
That's why I always use my middle initial.
Yeah. Was the 10th child of a crafter on a tiny island 40 miles off the west coast of Scotland who worked as a domestic servant when she first arrived in New York.
Yeah, for Andrew Carnegie's widow. Yeah. So it made perfect sense then when my mother, who was the child of a working class man who drove trucks, and then when they moved to Florida because of my other grandmother's rheumatoid arthritis, ran a clam shack. It made perfect sense for my grandmother from the Isle of Lewis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to look down her nose
right,
on
at
my
your
mother and treat her like she was a grifter. Interesting. And a gold digger.
Right.
You know, the hypocrisy among these people was just incredible.
Your parents seem to have a lovely courtship, and it really seems because of the influence of your grandfather. He criticized your father so much. He put him down. Nothing he did was good enough or right. He was a disappointment. Your father started drinking.
Yeah.
He was a compulsive smoker as well. I mean, he was.
He smoked a couple of packs of cigarettes a day.
And then your parents, of course, had a very rocky relationship. You said you have a memory of going into the bedroom and seeing your father with a rifle pointed at your mother.
Yes, that's my first memory. I was 2.5. And it's one of those flashbulb memories.
Yeah.
And he was very drunk. Not that that's an excuse, but that's what was going on. And he'd been under enormous stress. And I think it's important. I mean, I take both of my parents to task, I think legitimately. But if we think about what led up to that moment, and it was a pivotal moment, that's the last time he lived with us.
Right.
He knew what was expected of him. He was the namesake, he was the oldest son. It was the 40s and 50s. Of course, he was going to take over the empire. That's what he studied for. He started with my grandfather's company right out of college. He also, though, did have other interests. He got both his personal and professional pilot's licenses when he was in college. He was in ROTC. He became a second lieutenant in the National Guard. And my grandfather resented anything that took anybody's attention away from the only thing he thought was important, which was that very successful business.
Right.
But long before that, my grandfather, for reasons that I cannot explain, decided that my father was just wrong. He's the only person who thinks, other than Donald, although Donald obviously benefited enormously from what happened to my dad later. But I've spoken to people who'd been friends with my dad at the time. To a person, they see he was the best person they'd ever known. He was the funniest person, the kindest, the most generous, the most accomplished. He's literally the only self-made person in my family. And when working for my grandfather became untenable because it was obvious my grandfather was never going to hand over the reins of power.
Right.
My dad was miserable, and he just told my mom, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to apply and try to get a job as a pilot. And his first time out, he got a job with TWA, which was the second biggest airline at the time, run by Howard Hughes. He was sent to Kansas City for training and then moved to Marblehead because he flew out of Logan. He had the Logan to LA route. He was an extraordinarily accomplished man. And it lasted for 4 months because of the browbeating and the guilt trips. And he started drinking, and he and my mother were not partners. It was a very 60s marriage. You get married when you're 22, you have
And she
kids.
was forced to quit her job because she was pregnant. Stewardesses could not be pregnant.
That was the other, actually, it was worse than that. She couldn't be married. So she flew her last flight the day before they got married. And then after they got married, she got a job as a receptionist because, to her credit, she did want to work.
Right.
She had to quit that job when she got pregnant because
that's
you
right.
couldn't be a pregnant woman and be. So I think about what might have been if she'd been able to work, if he'd been allowed to be a pilot. Because the thing is, when he stopped being a pilot and he went back to work for my grandfather, he was never, ever given a chance to make it up. Donald was made president of Trump Management, leapfrogging my dad, who had worked there for 11 years, who was 8 years older. Donald was 24 and an idiot.
No.
I'm sorry. I don't. If you didn't know that, I apologize.
He went to Wharton.
No, he didn't.
I
know. So, I think the tragedy of all of that is neither one of them was allowed to be who they wanted to be. And my tragedy is that man, that lovely, smart, funny, kind, generous, accomplished man, didn't exist anymore by the time I was born.
You, at the age of 3, you learned how to read.
Mm-hmm.
You also have terrible asthma, which is a theme throughout the book, because you do, as you're reading, you get a feeling of being suffocated.
Doesn't that sound fun?
Yeah, no, but you really get.
Nobody's going to want to read the book.
It's so.
You too can feel like you're being
It's such a good book. All right, I'll get to the happy parts. But you develop asthma.
Yeah.
And your father's gone, and your mother tells you, just come in the bed with me. And you have to sit there, or lay there, but you said you sat up a lot, until she got up in the morning. But you really needed to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, I didn't know that.
Right.
I think I was 5. I'd had croup the year before, and apparently if you get croup, you're more likely to get asthma. And I had my first attack when I was around 5 years old, and it was a shocking feeling to wake up to. Not being able to do the most basic human thing is quite terrifying. So I went to her room because
of course. You go to your mom's room, yeah.
And I had no expectations of what was supposed to happen. But also what I didn't know is what was going to be set into motion. I didn't know that that was going to be the pattern for the next 10 years.
Right.
I didn't know that every time I had a very severe asthma attack, which was 4, 5, 6 times a year, she would wait for 7 hours because for various reasons, respiratory illnesses are worse at night, or they, are at their worst in the small hours. So if I went into her room at 1 and she wouldn't get up until 7, that was a long time. And you can't sleep.
Right.
Because you don't know if you're going to be able to inhale again.
And the doctor eventually scolded her.
Yeah. A couple of different things happened. One is I realized that she was doing something wrong.
Right.
Being told she has to be brought to the hospital immediately. And this was when inhalers were finally made available to kids when I was 12. So I'd already been dealing with for 7 years. And the inhaler was like a miracle. What I didn't know is that you can overdose on them.
Right.
So he said—
But you would spend time in the hospital after these asthma attacks.
Oh, for days, yeah. Because she waited so long and they got so bad, I would end up being in the hospital for 4 days or 5 days with IVs and prednisone. And yeah, it was very trying and very hard on my body, and it was exhausting. And I think I was 13, I broke my wrist playing softball, and we always went to the hospital where my mother was on the women's auxiliary. So she always had work to do and she knew people there. And I was in the waiting room for hours, and I went up to one of the nurses whom I'd known, and I was like, why am I waiting? Because you have an asthma attack, you go in right away. She said, because that's not life-threatening. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's asthma's life. Like, I'd never thought about it before.
Right.
So that was kind of alarming.
Yeah.
To have that information.
And feel neglected and validated in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get to a happy part. When you are 6, Fritz goes to camp.
Yes.
And you're 6 years old. And you want to go to camp.
Yes.
You just want to go, but they don't take kids until they're 7. You convince them to let you go to camp on Cape Cod.
On Cape Cod.
And you shine.
Yeah.
You are your own person. You learn. I talked to I'm friends with one of your camp friends, as you know, Paige.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And she said, you were a rock star there. You were the best sailor. You were the most athletic. Everyone loved you. She just went on and on about how all the girls looked up to you. I love that you had this camp, because as you get older, I got this many more months left.
Yeah.
And you live for that. How do you can you just talk about how that helped develop you as a person?
Yeah, I said earlier that growing up in Jamaica grounded me and sort of saved me from the worst things about my family.
Right.
I bypassed their hideous racism, their snobbery, their pretension, and camp saved my life. I never had an asthma attack when I was at camp. So that's telling, or diagnostic, as they say. And I discovered who I was there, partially. As you mentioned, I started reading very early, and reading was like a miracle for me. I entered into those worlds in a total way. So that's what reading did for me at home. At camp, it was about just the way I was able to move through the world there. And the things I learned, in 1 week, I could shoot archery, I could sail, I could swim in the bay, I could go canoeing. Not sure why anybody would want to go canoeing, but I went canoeing. And I could be in a play. I could do woodworking, so
And no one cared what your last name was.
well, nobody knew back then.
Right.
I mean, outside of New York, I should say. At school,
Right.
people definitely knew, but outside of New York, nobody knew.
Right.
It was irrelevant. And I also wasn't connected to anybody else. My brother went to camp too, but it was a separate campus. It was like half a mile down the beach. So I was completely my own person there, and I was able to connect to people in a way I couldn't at home. And I felt at home. I was never homesick.
And you talk about how they took care of you.
Yeah.
You know, you would get knotty hair, and you were so ashamed of it, and you thought you would get in trouble. And the counselor came in and was like, "Get over here. I'm gonna help you.
We're going to take care of that, And so I felt parented there in a way. I did not feel parented at home. And I also learned that I liked being good at things.
Right.
And there was this opportunity always to get better. I mean, I was fairly competitive, but mostly I was competitive with myself. And in fairness, Peggy Wilson was the best sailor, but I was a pretty good sailor.
And good at tennis too, I heard.
Actually, at camp, tennis was my 7th sport.
Oh.
I know, right? But
Wow.
I mean, the point being
Yeah.
that there was so much else to do, that just, I could do everything.
And you would cry on the way home.
Sob hysterically for the whole, can't imagine why. But yes, I mean, all of us did, but I in particular,
Right.
like for a day, I would
Right.
just be a complete basket case.
I mean, I don't think people realize that, we talk about the house, that you were there every Sunday.
And yeah, and Saturdays too. Yeah,
Right.
we were there practically every weekend until probably high school.
Right.
Or middle
And, I mean, everyone was there.
Yeah.
You tell a story about, Donald answering the phone and just being a jerk to your mother. You tell a story about how he was a bully. This is shocking.
I'm glad they're sitting down.
Yeah, that he was such a bully, but the minute someone stood up to him, he would run home.
Yeah, in fact, it was Kamala Harris.
Line of the night, baby. Come on, how good was that? Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you were always together,
Mm-hmm.
and this family was so screwed up. And you talk about going into the other rooms and your aunts being in their own room, and you couldn't walk in there, and you would find little places in the house to go, and I don't know.
Why am I laughing? I don't know. But yes, it was, in retrospect, now that I know how the world is supposed to work, it's just bizarre. They're just freaks. I mean, honestly, like we would be there and it would be my older cousin and my brother who were the first generation of grandchildren, because my Aunt Elizabeth and my Uncle Rob didn't have kids. So it was Aunt Marianne's son and me and my brother. And then Donald's first kid, I was 12 when Donald had his first kid. So it was just the 3 of us.
Such a great guy.
Such a great guy.
Do
And
you have any memories of them when they were kids, like little kids?
are you trying to traumatize me?
No, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I mean, I know
Sure,
that's
they were
partially
really
what we're here
cute
to
and-
talk
yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to
No, I know, I'm kidding.
Yeah, so the 3 of us would play soccer in the backyard, depending on if Rob was there, he was a soccer player. If Donald was there, he tried to break all the bones in our hands by throwing a fastball at us.
Yeah,
you know.
you got a special mitt.
My brother got me a professional catcher's mitt, and I didn't know why. Because I played softball, and it's a useless thing, and I was never a catcher.
Right.
And then I realized that so Donald wouldn't break my little hand. So, why am I laughing?
He would throw
He would throw, because we played with a hardball at the house. But I was the only, when it was the 5 of us, my uncles and brother and cousin, I was the only girl. I
Right.
was the youngest. And they didn't always want me around.
Right.
So I'd go into the house capital H. And my grandmother and my 2 aunts would be in the kitchen, and they would just completely ignore me. So I just, as you said, I'd wander around and I'd go to the basement and hang out. My grandfather actually had these humidors that were shaped by like Native American chiefs. And I'd hang out with them. There was a bar down there, which, considering my grandparents didn't drink, was fascinating. And, I would just make stuff up in my head. And I'd go up to my grandparents' room, which was quite terrifying to do. I would never do that if my grandfather was home, because my grandmother had, what's it called? A room where she would, I know that, see, I'm being eloquent again. Thank you. A dressing room. And she would have dozens of beautiful bottles of perfume. And there were mirrors on either wall. So like I could sit there and just like see this infinite number of reflections of myself and look at these perfume bottles and just felt like I was doing something transgressive.
Right.
And then it would occur to me that nobody noticed I was missing, and I should probably go downstairs so that I could go home instead of just like being caught when my grandfather got home.
You saw your father, your parents divorced, but you saw your father when he wasn't in rehab or when he was doing okay. He did have a couple of his own apartments, but he was really on a terrible track. And I think, you mentioned one of the apartments and he had snakes, he had pets, and I know that you love animals, and you got to spend, it wasn't all bad, your time with him, but he would get very drunk by the end, pass out. You had to call your mother sometimes to pick you up. But you watched him struggle. And again, and I think for self-care, you asked if you could go away to boarding school.
Yeah, which ended up being probably not my best decision. However, at the time, it was the privileged kid's way of running away.
Right, but because you said you you'd come home from camp and it would be so awful, and you thought, oh, if I go to boarding school, it'll just be an extension of camp.
Yeah, when I was a sophomore in high school, my brother went to college, leaving me completely alone. My dad, who had tried to get away, he'd moved down to Florida. He was hoping to get his pilot's license back, but he ended up needing open heart surgery at the age of 39. So he came back to New York. He ended up living back with my grandparents, started drinking again, smoking again. And then my mother, who was just deeply, deeply depressed. So that was my home life.
Right.
And it was unbearable. I was also unraveling at school. I was just, everything had changed in that couple of years. Adolescence is not kind to anybody.
Right.
But it was a very small school. I'd been there since I was 6. And I just kind of lost the thread. And of course, nobody knew what was going on at home. I still had the problem with the asthma. And now my dad was back and he was getting sicker all the time. My mother was not present in any way at all. She still wasn't taking me to the hospital when I needed to go, and I was alone. And at camp, somebody mentioned they were going to boarding school. I was like, that sounds like a great idea. And I think it might have been okay. I ended up going to Ethel Walker. I literally applied 3 weeks before this junior year, and I got in. They found a place for me. They turned a double into a triple. I was really excited about it. And my dad actually helped smooth things over with my grandfather, who kind of pitched a fit.
Well, we should say, because your father does decline, that your grandfather made him go work as a maintenance worker.
Yeah.
In one of the buildings.
Yeah.
Made him pay rent in a building that he owned 15% of.
Yes, that was us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to pay my grandfather rent on a building. I found out later I owned half of my father's 15% of that building. I mean, they stole it from me, so it was fine. It didn't end up meaning very much. But at the time, yeah, we're paying rent on an apartment we kind of semi-owned.
Right.
So, yeah.
And this all contributed to his downfall.
Yeah.
You go to Ethel. I remember this from your first book, Too Much and Never Enough. I never forgot this. It's sealed in my memory that it's a Saturday night, you're hanging out, Dunn, who you knew from camp, and she was the phys ed teacher, came in and said, come here, and she had a note, and the note said, call your mom. And you call your mom, she doesn't answer. Remember those days? And you call you feel something, you call your grandfather. He said, oh, your father's very sick, it's probably bad. You call your mother in the morning.
Don't worry about it, call your mother in the morning.
You call your mother back, she answers the phone, your father's dead.
Yes, he had died that night.
You sleep at Dunn's, and they put you on a bus from Hartford bus station to go home. No one came to pick you up.
Right. Yes, Greyhound.
This is fucking unconscionable behavior. This is horrible.
Again, I didn't know that.
Right.
Yeah, Greyhound from Hartford to Port Authority. And then I think I guess that's pretty bad.
Oh my God, are you kidding?
I didn't know. So what was weirder is that I actually went back to boarding school. My dad died 2 weeks after I started. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I went back the day after the funeral.
Day after the funeral.
Yeah. So
the Jews, they have to unite.
Where's your bell?
I know, I forgot my bell. Whatever, it's fine. I forgot it.
Come on.
Let's cut to
happier times.
Your fucking uncle.
See, it always comes back to that, doesn't it?
He doesn't win the vote, but he doesn't have as many votes as Hillary Clinton, but
because America.
He becomes president, and it's like the worst. I mean, you say in the book, he keeps winning, and I keep losing. And you go to a dinner at the Oval Office. You go in the Oval Office, and you go to have dinner for your aunt's birthdays.
That's what they call his cell phone. Like, why? Why did I do that to myself? Yeah, but it was for her birthday. I was actually fairly close with Marianne at the time. That's a long story, but
it's a great story in the book, yeah.
I felt that I should be there because in my family, if you don't do the thing you're asked to do, you're in trouble. But if you do the thing you're asked to do, it doesn't really count for much. Right. So I just felt it was safer to go.
And there's a picture of you.
Looking very. I felt very comfortable.
Yeah.
And it shows.
And your heel broke, so that was good too. Walking in the rose.
It was a perfect metaphor. I would have preferred to be able to walk properly, but literally walking into the White House feeling. Not literally. Walk into the White House feeling literally and figuratively off balance.
Yes.
Like so on the nose.
There's a lot of that in the book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, the asthma, the knots in your hair. There's so many sort of things that, okay, metaphors. You realize, I'm trying to push ahead, that it's such a story. The nightmares you have after your father died, the contact you had with your family, which was so fraught, and then You do make up with Marianne. You start having lunch with her. You are recording your conversations.
Well, that didn't happen right away.
Right. No, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it got complicated.
Okay.
Yeah.
You decide to write this book, Too Much and Never Enough.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, you are a doctor. I should call you Dr. Trump. Because you were an English major. You're very smart. You went to Tufts. You went to Columbia, and then you went to Adelphi, the school for, what's Derner?
Yeah, the Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies.
Yes.
For you purists among us,
Yes.
and there are a couple.
And so you have a PhD.
Yeah.
You write this book that I don't know how many people here read Too Much and Never Enough, but it was so validating to read that book that I'm not crazy. That this is all real. Everything I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And so you wrote that as sort of a salve, I think, for the United States of America to tell everyone they weren't crazy. But as you mentioned right in the beginning, you realized, I guess through, you're a trauma expert, shocking.
Well, that's overstating it.
Yeah, but you teach about trauma.
I did, yeah.
Or taught about trauma. You realize, and the way you describe it, and this is after Donald and your Uncle Robert sued to prevent the publication of that book, and then lost, and then they sued to prevent you even talking about the book, and they lost. And you have COVID, which is sort of like a gift. I mean, the quarantine, sorry. The quarantine is a gift because now you have an excuse to not deal with anyone. And as you said, you say that you have been in a constant state of grief, and you realize through treatment that you were disconnected from the grief itself. And so you had to face that grief in order to get over the...
Yeah, and that is the very tricky thing about trauma. And first of all, I think this is, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I think so many of us are traumatized, and this country is traumatized. And most of us don't realize it. And one problem with trauma is you can never cure PTSD, but with trauma, you can work on it, right? But you can't do that if you're constantly being traumatized.
Right.
And it's been one thing after another after another. And what is so difficult about getting to the point where you can mitigate your symptoms or ameliorate them somehow is you have to face the emotions that you've split off from the traumatic event. And you do that because it's unbearable. It feels unbearable at times. Like, I'm being tortured by the person who was supposed to take care of me and love me unconditionally. How do you feel anything about that, right? So,
well, it'd be too painful, right, to feel that.
Exactly. Yeah. But then you get stuck there. Like, part of me is still stuck in that bedroom. So you have to go there. And it feels like it's going to annihilate you. Mm-hmm. But as my trauma therapist has told me a lot, dissociating only takes you so far.
Right.
Like you cannot continue to subsist. You have to face it, you have to get through it, and you will. It may feel like it's going to kill you, but it's not. What's killing you is not doing that work. And I feel like we're all there as a country. Like we as a country, we don't ever do the work. What is that? We have to look forward, not back. No, we have to look back. Otherwise, we're going to keep doing this.
100%. I totally agree. What do you think the percentage of people in our country, what percentage are traumatized? No, I mean, it's more prevalent than we think, correct?
Oh my gosh. There's a difference
And people
between...
don't admit it or know it. Yeah.
Right. There's a difference between traumatized and actually ending up with a psychiatric disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder. I think we're all traumatized.
Right. I mean, the antidepressants.
It's just incredible what we've lived through.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some of us have been traumatized since 2016, and just watching the cruelty of the Trump administration, I don't know how anybody emerged from COVID without being traumatized.
I actually enjoyed it. I didn't have to see people,
Yeah. Okay, I see your point.
Yeah.
But just, the way it was turned into a point of division among us, like when we most needed to be brought together, when we most needed to be able to rely on each other, suddenly we can't trust each other.
Right.
Some of us don't
And people
care.
have gotten so mean.
So mean. It literally is like being in my family, just Oh, I actually meant that seriously, but I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Do you think
But it is literally, it's like, I grew up in a family in which kindness was considered a weakness. The only way to be worthy human being is to be tough, to be a killer, to be cruel, to extend no kindness to anybody. Like when my father was described, he was described as being a kind guy who was too generous for his own good, as if it were a curse.
Right.
That kind, weak piece of garbage who actually deserved to die at the age of 42. Like, that's the people I grew up among.
You do go, I love this part, you go to Scotland.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Your grandmother's family. Mm-hmm. And was that part of the healing process?
No, that was in 1990, actually. And it was, I was on my way to Italy for grad school. I went over there to spend the summer. I had no plans. It was a very 22-year-old thing to do. And I was supposed to hang out with a friend of mine at Cambridge, and it didn't go well. So I went up to Edinburgh. I'd never been to Scotland before. And I stayed at a bed and breakfast that had an army of cats. I love cats, but I'm deathly allergic to them. So at 5 a.m, I stumble out of the bed and breakfast, not being able to breathe. And I find a Waterstones, great bookstore. And I suddenly think, why don't I go to Stornoway? And I called my grandmother on a payphone. I'm like, hey, Gam, I'm thinking of going to Lewis to visit your family. She gives me their number. I call. This little boy answers the phone. I'm like, hi, I'm your cousin Mary, and I'm coming to Lewis tomorrow. Tell your mom. He's like, okay. So I take the ferry from Uig on the Isle of Skye over to Tarbet on the Isle of Harris, and I'm thinking of getting a cab to go across the island. And there's a woman standing in front of me, and she's looking at me, and she says, "Are you Mary?" It's like, yeah. It's like, I'm your cousin. Come on, we came to pick you up, and I stayed with them for 4 days.
Wasn't that healing?
At the time, I didn't know I needed to be healed, but
they were nice and warm, and
dare I say normal? Yeah.
And your father's cousin said he was your father's was the greatest guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the. This is going to sound terribly sad, but it actually happens to be true. As a kid, as a young adult at the time, that was the first time I felt like I had been with family. And of course, I never saw them again. But it was nice to have that experience for sure.
Wow. All right, are you ready to? Because we have to have them write it down, because otherwise it would be 20 minutes at the microphone with this is interesting. What has been the most interesting thing that writing this book taught you about yourself? I mean, you're so self-aware that it's...
Be less self-aware.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. That's not going to stand. The thing... Yeah, wow. Okay. That I now do to myself what other people used to do to me, and it's got to stop.
It's got to stop.
Got to stop.
Okay, here it comes. Are we playing into your uncle's agenda and mindset to make jokes now about the dog and cat comment? Or is joking the only way to counter his big lies? Well, as a comedian, I mean, it's my coping mechanism.
Yeah.
But how else do we cope with this? It's just constant bullshit.
Well, but, okay, so I think, I agree with your take on comedy.
Right.
I don't think there are lines. I don't. But you need to.
You need to write a great joke.
You need to write a great joke, and you need to take responsibility for it.
Right.
This, however, I'm not saying we can't joke about it because, again, it is so soul-crushing,
right,
and mind-boggling that this continues to happen, and it continues to get worse, and there is no bottom. However, that having been said, we also need to let people know that this isn't weird, this isn't crazy, this is dangerous. This is stochastic terrorism. And by perpetuating these vile untruths, Donald and his minions are putting hardworking people in danger to push an agenda that is anti-American and inhumane, and that's got to stop too.
I don't know if I should ask you this.
Let's find out.
All right. Do you think he will win this election? And if he wins, what should we expect? He's not going to win. He cannot win.
Yeah, he cannot win.
He cannot. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, I'm not speculating about that. This is what I will say. We need to prepare for his losing. I said this in 2016 and nobody listened to me. Sorry, not 2016. I was hiding out in my living room in 2016, so obviously very few people heard me. But in 2020, I said the same thing. Donald just doesn't have to lose. The Republican Party has to lose. They have to lose so resoundingly that they don't have power anymore. That didn't happen. Republicans outperformed Donald. We have to get it right this time. We need to increase our margin in the Senate. We need to take back the House by 50 seats. We need the White House. We need President Kamala Harris. We need Vice President Tim Walz. And we need to take that momentum and we need to take those margins and we need to focus on making this democracy a real democracy that represents all of its people so we no longer have to fight this rearguard action against encroaching fascism. It's unsustainable and it causes attrition. We get weaker every single time. We have to move forward and actually start focusing on things that are going to make this country work for everybody.
100. When you say the Republican Party, because it's not, I don't even recognize the Republican Party.
Right.
Do you think it's gone and it's just MAGA?
100% of elected Republicans support Donald Trump. There's no moderate Republicans.
What do you think he has on these people?
I think
he's got to have something on Lindsey Graham.
Maybe, maybe, but I don't, listen, I think we give people too much credit.
Yeah.
There are a lot of horrible people in this world. Tens of millions of people like what Donald Trump is selling. We just have to face that. Yes, a lot of people are getting lied to as well, but a lot of people like the fact that he gets away with it. That is one of the things that people find most attractive about him. He gets away with it. They love that he's cruel. They love that he beats up on people they also hate. They love that he champions them. These people who should be
Well, the J6 people.
Yeah, the J6 people, the white supremacists.
I don't understand how any female.
I was talking to somebody about this recently, and
No problem. Take care. Bye-bye. Huh?
Anybody?
Any other
Okay.
Republicans want to leave? Okay. I'm kidding, not. Okay.
What was happening?
I don't know.
So, yeah, I totally lost my train of thought because that was riveting. But, we thank you. Thank you. That's much more intelligently than I was putting it. But we literally have to stop giving people too much credit. And as for misogyny, one of the most misogynistic people I've ever known is my Aunt Marianne. She was a federal judge. She had such contempt for women. Such contempt for women.
It's so horrible when it comes from women.
Yeah, and she grew up in New York. I mean, so
Right.
imagine what's going on. That's geographic snobbery. I apologize, but what I'm saying is, like, she grew up with access to diversity, and
Right.
I mean, not in Jamaica States, but she was a woman who lived in the world. Like, she saw what was going on and just hated women. The way she talked about women was just breathtaking.
Awful. How does your daughter feel about you writing books?
Well, I cannot speak for her.
Right. She is adorable. She's
Yes,
great.
she is.
Yeah.
She's the best person
Yeah.
I know and have ever known. So I'm not going to speak for her, but what I will say is that this hasn't been easy, and from 2016, that first couple of years took a toll.
Right.
So I think the least I can do is try to make this world better, because I think Gen Z in particular has had so much burden placed upon them by our mistakes, by the mistakes of the older generation, and we really need to turn things around. Also, Gen Z needs to be given permission to take their power, because they have so much power. And I know it's frustrating for them to feel like they have to clean up our mess, but I think the best way to look at it is they have the power to create the world they want and tell us to get in line or get out of the way.
Love that. Okay. One question with two parts. This will be the final one. Someone wrote, "What is his diagnosis?" So will you kind of explain it in Too Much and Never Enough?
Right.
So what is his diagnosis? And then I would like to know what his sycophant cronies diagnosis is. Okay.
Yeah. Second question first.
Okay. Whatever you want to do.
They're just terrible people. They're terrible people. They're fascists. I'm not making excuses for them, I mean, I'm not making excuses for Donald either, but, most people who have psychological problems or psychiatric disorders, they're not bad people. They're
Right.
just struggling. He's surrounded himself with the worst, sorry, I almost swore, the worst
Fuck
people.
shit, fuck.
Oh, well, look at you.
Yeah.
The worst fucking people on the planet.
Yes.
And as for Donald, the long answer, which I'll keep short, is I can't diagnose him because diagnosis is a process. It's not like you just say, oh, I think that person has narcissistic personality disorder. You have to do an intake interview with them, and they have to sit down for a battery of psychological tests, and they have to be, there's an IQ test and an achievement test, and there are subjective tests, and then you have to spend hours analyzing the data and writing reports. And, it's a huge, long process, and it's irresponsible. And also, not only is he not my patient, I'm his family. I have no business getting anywhere near that. I have no problem with other people doing it. I think the Goldwater rule is ridiculous, and I think there's enough information about him in the world because he's never going to sit for those tests anyway. Mm-hmm. There's enough information in the world for mental health professionals to make assessments of them, and actually, I think that we're done with the panels of lawyers. Let's get panels of mental health professionals. Let's get clinical psychologists. Let's get psychiatrists, neuropsychologists, neurologists, sociologists sitting on a panel and analyzing his rallies and helping the American people understand exactly what is going on with this person. The short answer is, it doesn't fucking matter. He is a fascist. He's a monster. He's cruel. If he feels like he's going down, he's going to take the rest of us down with him. We need to remove him from the body politic entirely and be done with this.
That is. Oh my God. You need to go campaign.
Well,
no, I mean, door to door.
Story for another time.
Mary, you're writing. I just love this book. I love all your books. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for, sharing so much of what you went through. And this was such an honor. And you're a gift. You are such a gift. And shalom. Autograph copies. There's autograph copies in the lobby. And it's such a great read. So go buy the friggin' book. Thank you.